Welcome, this is Information Service Engineering, lecture number 2, Natural Language Processing, part 2. This is part 6 of the lecture, and in the last 2 parts of this lecture we will talk about part-of-speech tagging. You might remember part-of-speech tagging from the very first lecture when I showed you some examples how this works in practice, but now we are going to see how this is implemented. Okay. First of all, part of speech, what is it? Usually we are talking about category of words which have similar grammatical properties. These are part of speech. So words that are assigned to the same word part of speech generally display similar behavior in terms of syntax. And often these kind of categories are also referred to as lexical categories, word classes, morphological classes, or lexical tags. Part-of-speech tagging, or the categorization of these words, is rather old. Already in antiquity there was this guy Dionysius Thrax of Alexandria around 100 BC. He described 8 different parts of speech, so he already distinguished nouns from verbs, from pronouns, prepositions, adverbs, conjunction, participle and article. Okay, but let's see how this has further developed. But first of all, let's take a look at a few of the word categories. So this means we make a short detour and look at some linguistic basics. So what is a noun? You all know what a noun is. A noun is a word that functions as the name of some specific thing or sets of things. So like example for living creatures, humans, we all have names, objects, places, actions, qualities, state of existence, ideas, etc., etc. Among those nouns we do further distinctions. So first of all, there are proper nouns, which are things which do have a name. So it names a specific entity, like my name, Harald, or Karlsruhe, KIT, HPI, and so on. These are specific names which are so-called proper nouns. Besides these proper nouns, which denote specific entities, we also have so-called common nouns, which is all the rest. And therefore, we distinguish furthermore among the common nouns the so-called count nouns, so nouns that allow any kind of enumeration, like for example the dog. We have 1 dog, we have 2 dogs, 3 dogs, or other nouns which don't allow an enumeration, which are so-called mass nouns. So these are conceptualizations of, as it's called, an homogeneous group. For example, snow. It doesn't make sense to say 1 snow, 2 snow, 3 snow. At least, I mean, only if snow denotes somebody like Jon Snow. But of course, the snow, it's uncountable, so therefore it's kind of a mass noun. Like heat, salt, etc. So these are nouns. Then the second major class in languages usually are words. Verbs are referring to actions, processes, occurrences, states of being, and so on. And there also we distinguish 2 different classes of verbs. First we have the main verbs, which provide the main semantic content of a clause. Like in the famous clause, the dog ate my homework. And then we have so-called auxiliary verbs or auxiliaries, and they add some functional or grammatical meaning to the clause in which it appears, such as, for example, to express tense, aspect, modality, voice, emphasis, and so on. So a typical auxiliary is do, and in the case of do you want tea, it expresses, of course, then an auxiliary grammatical meaning. So we distinguish main verbs and auxiliary verbs. Then there are adjectives, so adjectives describe or modify or give more information about nouns and pronouns like big, happy, green, young, funny, crazy, 3, and so on and so on. And then there are pronouns, and pronouns are used in place of a noun or a noun phrase, simply to avoid tiresome repetitions. So pronouns, for example, are I, you, we, they, he, me, it, and so on. So these are the 4 most important classes. So here you have a better overview over more classes. First we have nouns, like for example book or books, nature, Germany, Sony. We have verbs like eat, wrote. We have auxiliaries, can, should, have. We have adjectives, new, newer, newest. We have adverbs, well, urgently. Then we have some numbers like 872. We have articles or determiners like the or some. We have conjunctions and, or, as, and so on. We have pronouns. We had them just me, my. We have prepositions to, in. We have particles like of and up, and we have interjections like au or i. But of course, these are not all potential classes. There can be even more. We will see this later on. Furthermore, we will talk about a property of these word classes which distinguish so-called open word classes and closed word classes. What is the difference? So first have a look at the closed word classes. These are classes which usually don't grow. So this is a limited number of words, and usually there are not necessarily new words of these classes created, like for example auxiliaries, articles, determiners. So you don't invent a new determiner. So therefore this is kind of a closed class, and usually these are function words, short common words which play a role in grammar. So some examples are, for example, here prepositions like on, under, over, particles up, down, on, off, determiners, pronouns, and so on. So these belong to the so-called closed word classes. And in difference to the closed word classes, there are of course open word classes like nouns, verb, adverbs, adjectives. And there, of course, an unlimited number of words might occur. And there are, of course, always new words because you invent them. If there is a new gadget, you give it a name. Or if you want to express a specific kind of feeling, you give it a name, and therefore you create new nouns, new verbs, and so on. So these are the open word classes where you have to deal with newly created words, neologisms, it's called. Okay, so these were the words and some of the properties of the words. Let's have a look at specific existing tag sets. So we have seen already some POS tags that exist, but we see here that there exist different tag sets with even more POS tags than we have experienced so far. The most prominent one probably is the Brown tag set, which has been devised in 1982, and this comprises 87 tags, and it's based on the so-called Brown corpus. That's the rather prominent corpus of present-day American English, which was issued by the Brown University. Then you have the so-called C5 tag set or the C7 tag set. There we have 61 tags, respectively 146 tags. And then there is the tag set that is here denoted in red. And this is the Penn Treebank tag set. This is the tag set that we will deal with further on. This contains only 45 tags, so it's a more limited number of tags, and this has been issued in 1993. And in general, this is some kind of a simplified version of this prominent Brown tag set for de facto standard English now. But just to see an example, there are also tag sets which comprise even more tags. So the Prague Dependency Treebank tag set, a Czech, it has been issued by Czech researchers. This tag set comprises already 4,452 tags, and you can't tell me that you can really remember all of them. Talking about remembering, let's have a look on the Penn Treebank tag set. You see here it's 45 tags, and of course it's a bit more elaborated than the 8 tags that we have already seen. So it starts here, for example, with conjunctions, then there comes cardinal numbers, then comes a determiner, then there is an extension there, then a foreign word, then conjunctions, adjectives, then there are comparative adjectives, superlative adjectives, and so on. You see, this is a finer granularity. Also for the nouns, we have here NN, for example, denotes a noun which is a singular noun or a mass noun, then NNS denotes a noun which is in a plural form, or NNPS, for example, or NNP denotes a proper noun, of course, which is a noun which denotes a specific entity, and so on and so on. And then we have a second page where you also see the verbs and different tenses of the verbs, for example, or you also have punctuation marks or parentheses and separators and so on. So overall it's 45, and usually if you see this Penn Treebank text set used, it's only then the abbreviations you see here on the left side that are used. Okay, so now how does part of speech tagging really work? Usually you have a set of tags, like for example our Penn Treebank tag set. Then you have some kind of raw tags, and both of them are input of the POS tagger, which produces a so-called tagged tags. And here all the words are marked up with the label, with the tag that comes from the used tag set. So here, for example, we have the text Ernest M, 61 years old, will join the board as a non-executive director November 29. And if you look now at the POS tags, this is in the yellow box, the tagged tags, you see Ernest as a proper noun, M, the initial is also a proper noun, 61 is a cardinal number, then we have years, which is a noun, and here it's a plural noun, old is an adjective, and then will, this is an auxiliary, join, it's a verb, the, it's a determiner, board, noun again, s, this is a conjunction, a, it's a determiner, non-executive, again, an adjective, then director, that's a noun, and then November, this is a proper noun, and then 29, again, cardinal number, and then you have a punctuation. So you would like to have exactly these red tags assigned to your text. Now the question is, how do we do that? First of all, of course, it should be clear there is no unique, let's say, mapping between an arbitrary word and its tag, because a word can be used in several circumstances, in different contexts, and therefore the part of speech tag of a specific word might be ambiguous. So a word often has more than one POS tag. You have here some examples. Here, for example, the word back. If we look at it in the sentence, on my back, then back, of course, it's a noun. If you say my back door, then back is an adjective. To win the voters back would be an adverb, and promised to back the bill, then back even is a verb. So you see, it can have several different roles. So what we can see here already is that the tag of a word does not necessarily only depend on the word itself. We have to take into account the context. So this is really important. So just to give you some statistical information about the ambiguity of POS tags, in our brown corpus that is labeled with these 45 tags that we have seen, we have unambiguous tags, so words which only have one tag. There are only 38,000 words, but then there are 8,000 or more than 8,000 words which are really ambiguous. 6,700 of them have two tags. 1,600 of them 3 tags, 357 have 4 tags, and so on. And it even goes to words which have 8 or 9 tags. 9 tags, for example, here for the 3 words that, more, and in. So here it's really highly context dependable which kind of tag you will choose in the end. So when we do part of speech tagging then, and really apply this then in the next part of the lecture, first I wanted to show you some use cases for which part of speech tagging can be used. So for what is it really useful to know exactly what is the type, what is the category of the word. First of all, an example would be speech analysis. Speech synthesis. What does it mean, speech synthesis? You have a text and you want to know how to pronounce the text. So how do I pronounce let or lead? So how do I pronounce insult or insult? How do I pronounce object or object? So if you pronounce the first syllable or the last syllable, this changes the meaning of the word. And of course, this has to do with what part of speech this word belongs to. If you know the part of speech, it's more clear how you should pronounce the word. So therefore, this is a use case where you use part-of-speech tagging. Another thing, of course, is parsing. So what words are in a sentence? This is the typical, or let's say the classical application. But then also for any kind of information extraction, if you want to find names, if you want to do entity recognition, entity linking, it's also important that you know what's the part of speech of a word. And of course, also if you do machine translation. For example, then, if you translate the noun content, it may have different translations from the adjective. That's clear. So these are different use cases where it's important to know the part of speech. And in the next part of the lecture, we will show you how part of speech tagging actually is implemented.